Whatever today's dictators or wannabe dictators may tell you, the law still matters and justice will be served. Hello, I'm David Debato, and you're watching the No Delusion Zone for Tuesday, July 28th, 2026. And the law, and especially justice, is the focus of today's podcast. You know, today in many countries around the world, the law, whether it's local, national, or international law, is being flaunted, is being disregarded as trite, something that they don't really have to pay any attention to. That's something in the past. It's kind of cute, but nothing they have to pay attention to. And we've got such a leader in this country, and I hate to use the word leader, but the president of my country seems to think that the law is anything that he says it is. And whenever he wants to disregard it, he just ignores it. We've got another guy in Moscow, in the Kremlin, who feels pretty much the same way. And the list is unfortunately very long. But today I'm going to focus on one of those two individuals, Vladimir Putin, the Tsar of Russia, and his illegal, immoral, and barbaric invasion and occupation of the eastern Donbass in Ukraine, because he definitely seems to think that the law is whatever he says it is, and international law, or even his own law in Russia, really doesn't matter to him. It doesn't apply to him because he's a dictator. He can do whatever he wants, and unfortunately, the brainwashed, the brainless Russian public, for the most part, just goes along with that. Because if you ask any Russian today, mostly, what they think of the war or international news or anything, they almost uniformly to a person say that they don't pay attention to the news. It's not important to them. They just want to go along with their lives. And if you ask them a specific topic about an attack on, say, Kyiv or Kharkiv or Kherson or anything else, the brutality that's going on every single day in Ukraine in the name of the Russian people, again, they'll say that they don't pay any attention to the news, so they're not aware of it. Unfortunately, for those head-in-the-ground ostriches in Russia, the war's being brought home to them in the form of, as President Zonesky says, long-distance sanctions, long-range sanctions. The most recent sanctions that he's been applying rather successfully is the obliteration of several wild berries warehouses, some of them in the Moscow area, some of them in central Russia, some of them in southern Russia. And these ostrich-like Russians are really going a little bit nuts today about that, because I guess hundreds of thousands of them, the budding entrepreneurs that they are, have had all of their inventories that were housed in the wild berries warehouses destroyed. So some of them are, I was going to say, penniless or kopeck-less, and don't know quite what to do. And a lot of them, I'm not going to play any of the videos of these brainless Russians, but many of them are posting videos asking the Ukrainians, have you no compassion? Don't you care about regular people? How can I make a comment about that? I think you can read between the words and read between the lines as to how I feel about the barbaric, brainless, brainwashed Russians having the nerve to ask Ukrainians if they have any compassion because their Amazon of Russia is being destroyed. You pathetic pieces of crap. In any event, that's not really the specific focus of my podcast today. The specific focus is on what should be done when Russia loses the war, and they will, and Ukraine is victorious. It's not going to happen tomorrow. I guarantee that. It's not going to probably happen this year, but it will happen. And when that happens, if we in the Western world hope to ever avoid another situation like this, meaning Russia attacking another country in Europe and just acting like the barbarians that they are, we are going to have to oversee the total demolition of the current Russian state. That does not mean or even imply genocide, so I don't want to hear that. I am not for genocide. I don't care who it is, but we must, in whatever way we can, destroy, demolish, raze to the ground the current Russian government. It hasn't worked. It isn't working, and it will not work in the future. They have never known democracy. Never. In the 800 plus years that the modern Russian state has existed. They don't know what democracy is. The few years in the 90s that they experimented with it after the fall of the Soviet Union was a disaster. I'm not going to get into why it was a disaster, but a big part of it was that the Russians have never known democracy. So when it was thrust on them, true to form, many Russians, the former heads of the Soviet Union, just it was a free-for-all. They grabbed whatever they could and stole from the fledgling want-to-be democracy in Russia in the 1990s, and they became the billionaire oligarchs of today. Essentially, it was the same thing. The Soviet Union seized all the land, so the state owned everything. There was no private ownership for the most part. And so the oligarchs are functioning as quasi-Soviets today. But they're just doing it under the guise of a democracy with a Russian, in quotes, constitution. In any event, that's not going to work. It never has worked. If anything, the state of affairs in Russia today is very similar to the waning days of the Soviet Union. It's getting worse for the Russian people. And if, for some reason, Russia does prevail even partially in Ukraine, meaning they continue to occupy the eastern part of Ukraine, the Donbass, even if they don't succeed in, God forbid, occupying the entire country, they will not retreat from Ukraine. They will rebuild. They will call a pause, and they will rebuild their army, their military, and they will attack Europe. They will start with Eastern Europe. They may start with whatever hybrid war you want to talk about, whether it's just psychological warfare, massive drone attacks, probing attacks in Eastern Europe, the Baltics, you name it. But when they feel they are ready, once they have done what they want to do in Ukraine, once there's a pause there, a ceasefire of some kind, and they occupied either the eastern Ukraine, the Donbass, or all of Ukraine, which I don't think is possible right now, but let's just say the West, for whatever delusional reason, allows a peace offering to happen against the will of the Ukrainian people and enforces it. So Russia occupies eastern Ukraine. They will rebuild their military. They will attack Europe. They will. There's no question about it. So we can't have that happen. They need to be crushed now. Not today, as I said. It's going to take a while, but NATO, Europe, the EU, NATO need to get their stuff together, which they're starting to do, but they need to move faster. Ukraine's already showing them what a country can do. Ukraine is the innovator. They are the ones inventing or reinventing warfare for the 21st century. They are showing Europe and the rest of the world, including the United States, what to do. And what to do is to ensure that Russia loses this war so they don't create the scenario I just talked about, where they occupy some or all of Ukraine and then invade and occupy Europe. That can't happen. So the only way to do that is to defeat Russia in Ukraine now, but not just defeat them. And I don't want to hear how you cannot humiliate Russia. They've already humiliated themselves by what they're doing. They need to be crushed. Whether Putin needs to be executed, exiled, whatever, he needs to go. But whoever takes the place of Putin ain't going to be any better. He may probably or could be worse. No, they don't have the infrastructure. They don't have the history. They don't have the culture to form a real democracy. If they are allowed to continue in the current form, the governmental form they are in now, they will be a constant danger to everyone, After all, they are a nuclear power, unfortunately. Now, they need to be crushed. The current Russian system of government needs to be eliminated totally. And after they're driven out of Ukraine and their system of government is eliminated. It will take a long time. We, the Western world, needs to have a military tribunal, a war tribunal for the war criminals that have been created in Russia as a result of their aggression, their invasion of Ukraine. And I want to point to a piece that was just posted in the New York Times that talks specifically about that. And it's not new news, meaning this has been something that's been ongoing for a few years, but it's finally reaching fruition somewhat. And I'm just going to post the title here to start. And it's titled, Putin Saw a Gap in Which He Could Act with Impunity. Let's close that gap. And what they're talking about here is what I mentioned at the start of this video, that dictators like Putin have, they're no dummies. They've seen that the world is ignoring the fact that he and other dictators are ignoring international law. He knew that NATO wasn't going to do anything if he attacked Ukraine, and we didn't. We didn't. So what this piece is going to be about, and I'm going to read some excerpts, is what to do when Russia is defeated and their government is crushed to the point that we can hold their leaders, their war criminals, to account, just like we did in Nuremberg after World War II. This is a scene from the docket in Nuremberg with some of the leaders there. I think Goering is there on the front left with the headphones, and after which is the just desserts on the right of one of the lucky winners of the guilty verdicts in Nuremberg, seeing his fate. And that needs to happen, the trial at the very least, an international criminal tribunal for the violation of international law, human rights, and war crimes. Thousands and thousands of war crimes. The Russian leaders need to be in the docket you just saw of the Nazi leaders, only this time in The Hague. So without going any further, I am going to read from that piece that I just showed you. So let's read this together, if you will, and I'll talk about it on the other side. In May, in Chisinau, the capital of Moldova, 36 states and the European Union signed an agreement to make the Special Tribunal for the Crimes of Aggression against Ukraine a reality. The culmination of years of work that began soon after Russia launched its full-scale invasion in 2022. Since the trials at Nuremberg and Tokyo held after World War II, no court has adjudicated the decision to start a war. In the decades since, aggression has survived, recalibrated, and repeated itself, despite a clear prohibition in the UN Charter, which legally binds all member states to uphold international peace. President Vladimir Putin of Russia, for one, seems to have concluded that there was a space in which he could act with impunity. This new tribunal begins to close the gap. It is begun as a response to one war, but the precedent it will set, that aggression carries direct consequences for the aggressor, will carry its own geopolitical weight. And these writers, all professors of international law and judges of jurisprudence, are well aware of what you're probably going to say if you're reading along with me here. That's nonsense. It's not going to have any teeth. Plus, it's going to take too long. Nobody's going to pay any attention to it, so forth and so on. I tend to agree with that. If you listened to my podcast or read anything I've written over the last several years, you'll know that I am one of the biggest critics of the UN and NATO and the EU for how they ignore international law, how there's no enforcement mechanism in their laws, in international law, and specifically with NATO and the EU, how they're all a bunch of cowards, the leaders, how they don't enforce even their own regulations and their own laws against aggression. They're not even defending themselves. So no, I understand what you're probably saying, but, and I'm going to read the next piece, they address that specific critique, that specific comment. We are aware of the criticisms of international law that when people are dying, statements of guilt or arrest warrants that see nobody arrested can seem like empty gestures. That, in a fast-moving world, it can seem that International justice moves at a glacial pace. That states simply refusing to ratify treaties can make it seem as if those who have agreed to be bound by them are simply shouting from the sidelines. We disagree. It is essential that we continue to establish the rules and norms that we, as an international community, propose to operate by. Justice may proceed slowly and cautiously, but it does proceed. It creates a record of what happened and prevents the aggressor from having the last word. And again, I realize that many of you may say, well, so what? It's just empty words again. You're not going to kill someone with a subpoena or hit them over the head with a transcript. No, you're not. But as this, I think, piece eloquently says, and it's a much longer piece, I encourage you to read it in the New York Times if you are interested. We cannot make the flaunting, the disregard of international law and norms the norm. That's happening here in my country. Look, no doubt about it. President Trump and MAGA, the former Republican Party, is doing everything they can to sow chaos and to make disobeying the law, from flaunting our own Constitution and even making political violence the norm. So people become numb to what's going on, become numb to illegality, and start to shrug their shoulders. Well, they're talking in this piece about international law and wars of aggression, genocide, big items, something that the world as a whole needs to take into consideration. And no matter what happens in the future, we need to hold those that are guilty accountable. We need to say that no, we as a society, as human beings, are not going to forget what happened. We may not have all the power to hold all of the aggressors to account for their deeds, for their crimes, but we certainly are going to make a record of it. And when and if the time comes, we are going to hold them accountable. We will have trials, just as they did in Nuremberg, and we will throw these sons of bitches in prison. Some of them, hopefully, for the rest of their lives. Others, depending on the time and circumstances, may get their necks wrung, just as the photo I showed you from Nuremberg. That has to happen, and no matter how long it takes, I'm for it. It needs to happen, and I fully support those who are behind this effort to do, again, an international tribunal for the war criminals in Russia. And as it said, this will set a precedent. It's not just for what's happening in Ukraine, although that's the impetus and where it started in 2022. This will hopefully set a precedent for all dictators in the future who do the same thing as Putin. And unfortunately, what my own president is embarking on here in my country. So no, I totally agree with this. Yes, you may say that they're empty words, but you know what? Deeds and actions start with words. That's where it all starts. And we cannot forsake the rule of law, and we must insist that justice be served. And that's all for today's podcast. So please support me. Come here, tell your friends, relatives, neighbors about the No Delusion Zone. Like us and subscribe to the No Delusion Zone. I need all the support I can get. Just went past 50,000 subscribers not too long ago, so I'm shooting for 100,000. And you can help. All of you can help. No Delusion Zone. So anyone who gives a damn about democracy, gives a damn about international law, and is against dictators and what we're seeing all over the world, especially in Russia, and unfortunately, like I said, in the United States, like and subscribe to No Delusion Zone. And until next time, you all take care, stay safe, and stay sane.